Saltwater Gaelic Sutherland Highlanders deep in the heart of German-occupied France in June 1940. They were Sandy MacDonald, Willie Kemp and Ginger Wilson, who had all joined the Eighter Gaels on the same day and who fought alongside each other until being captured near Sambrimo on the 7th of June 1940. Well, the threesome didn't much relish the prospect of spending the war cooped up in some German prison camp. On the 14th of June they made their break. Thus began a 1,000-mile trek through German-occupied France and ultimately across the Pyrenees into Spain, and then home in triumph to a hero's welcome in Scotland. Sandy MacDonald, son of a celebrated Highland soldier, known affectionately as the Blood, died several years ago, and his widow still lives in Ballachullish. Willie Kemp sadly died on Armistice Day this November, and he's survived by his widow, who resides in Aberdeen. Ginger Wilson, however, is still a very active Ken Speckle figure in Fort William. Early this summer, I went along to record Willie and Ginger, and they related their marvellously exciting tale to me. It's not possible to include it all in this programme. From the necessities of time, some wonderful stories can't be recounted. How they posed as Irish-American fugitives from the French Foreign Legion, or that when they reached safety in Spain, their boots were only kept together by being bound up with napkins. But it's still an adventure story par excellence, and it opens with Willie telling me how they first decided to make their break.
Well, after about 2 or 3 days in the march, I happened to meet Sandy MacDonald and Ginger Wilson. And it was then that the thoughts of making a break for it occurred to us. So we dived into a cornfield by the side of the road. But we're only there minutes when we heard the familiar German cry, Rausch, whatever they say in German, get out. So of course we just joined the column again. At the back of the column was a German supply truck with a platform on, a gun platform on, which saw right over the column. They could see for miles up the roads. But we came to this particular little village called Cambrin, and there was a woman at the gate dishing out water. So I said to the boys, come on now, this is our chance.
So Willie said to me, come on. In fact, I believe he said it in Gaelic. I think he did. And Sandy was just behind us. And we made for this, through this big iron gate. And funny enough, we closed the gate after us. We did indeed. And then ran into this garden, into a rhododendron bush.
But the woman started shouting, oh, Ali, Ali, Boko Alaman. And a little boy of, I would say, 10 or 12, told his mother, ushered his mother into the house, shooed her away, and pointed to a row of bushes in the back of the garden, told us to get down, which we did.
A German came in to the garden. He came to the end of the house and had a look at the boy and the mother. The mother was standing in the door, shaking like a leaf. Eventually, he was quite satisfied. There was nobody there. And he about and we, this time, had our faces covered with our helmets, to keep the whiteness from the green, peering out through the green. So he went away, and we stayed there for 2 hours to give them plenty of time to move. The column, you see, there was 35,000 in the column itself, you see, and it took a long time to pass.
The little boy brought out some old civilian clothes. He made gestures saying that to convey to us his father was in the army, in the French army. And we stayed there a while, and not wanting to be caught in there in civilian clothes, and especially English soldiers, which would have meant, they would certainly have reacted pretty badly to the French folk if we'd been caught in their back garden in civilian clothes. And we set off.
We had an idea that we'll get to the coast, you see. This was our sole idea, was to get to the coast. And, well, we didn't know how the war was going, you see. First of all, we were trying to get behind the Maginot Line, that was it. And we were making over towards the Maginot Line, when a woman told us that the war was over and the Germans had occupied all the coastline And they were smashing the boats, the boat that was, wee boats, everything they could lay their hands on, so that nobody could get away. You see. So we turned back then.
We carried on and eventually came to the town of Lawns, a mining town, and met a miner going to his work. Evidently he was carrying a flask, an enamel flask, and spoke to him. And he knew evidently that we weren't French, and pointed to our boots, British Army boots we wore. And he said, you know, Puto Anglais. So of course we knew then, but he says he said this, made us sign, it's all right, I won't say anything. And went back with us and took us to his house, gave us a meal, looked out from his back door. That monument we saw in the distance was the Canadian Memorial at Vimeridge. We were going to go south to head in that direction, and when night came we set off. And we kept the canal banks most of the time and headed south till we came to Cambrai. We found us occupied by Germans. We walked along, and before we went, I said, no, break step, you know, don't walk like soldiers, shuffle along, you see, and kid on, you're not anything but a soldier. When two chaps carrying a Dixie passed us, and when I turned my head, there were the RAMC badges on their shoulders, evidently RAMC men captured by the Germans who were using them there as orderlies. And when passing, I happened to say, hello, how are you? They very near dropped the Dixie, but they never stopped. We carried on walking as well.
How about food?
Well, we just lived off the land. There's plenty of food.
This would be your Highland training in poaching where you come in handy here.
Well, to a certain extent, yes. Ginger was good. We had some rabbits and ginger. Some of them were pretty tough at times, but Ginger was pretty expert at killing the rabbits, skinning them, gutting them, and we had a few pretty tough rabbit stews on the way down.
I was a cook. I always did the cook. I don't know why, but it seemed to fall to my lot to do it, and I did it, and that was that. Willie was the general. Sandy looked before he left, put it that way. And he was the stabilizing factor between the three of us, I would say. We once got into a farm, and I killed a couple of rabbits. We made soup with the forequarters, and I stewed the hindquarters, you see. This is where the German came in when I was busy making the soup. And he laid his machine, you know, light machine gun down beside me, and all I had to do was to stretch my hand down. I could have shot him dead. I said to myself, well, there was not much sense in doing it. He says, did we belong to the farm? And I nodded my head and said, we, you see. So he was quite content. He sat down, and I asked him would he have a plate of soup, and he had that. And I gave him one of the chops. I didn't want to give it to him, but I gave him one of the hindquarters, and he enjoyed it. And then he went away. He looked at his watch, and he must have had to go in a hurry because he went out. He took out 20 Capstan and gave me a cigarette. So I was busy smoking away at the cigarette. When Willie came in, Willie had been browsing around. Willie and Sandy were away browsing around the farm looking to see what they could find. And he says, where did you get the cigarette? I said, oh, Jerry, where is he? I said, he's just away from the corner there. Willie away after him, came back with the 20 cigarettes. I said, where did he give them to you? Yeah, yes, he had plenty in a haversack yonder. So he gave me 20. Well, that was that.
How about wine and rum?
Oh, well, the cafes were empty in the car. They'd been already, most of them were pretty well looted by the Germans, but there's always, down the cellars, there's always a certain amount left. So
you didn't go thirsty?
There was no whiskey, but there was plenty of rum, which we carried with us. We had a bag. We carried the rum with us, and we usually had a drink last thing at night and first thing in the morning before we set out. We went down through a little place called O'Mal. There's an empty cycle shop there with bits and pieces in the window, and we decided we'd alter and would get a bicycle. So Sandy MacDonald and Ginger they went into the shop while I kept watch outside, and they're rigged up. There's a lady's bicycle, which wasn't too bad. There's a gent's bicycle, and there's another bicycle which had a back pedaling brake and a solid rubber tire, which me being the watchdog was palmed on to me. All the worst of it, you had to pedal up hills and down hills on it. But we got there eventually till we were stopped again by the Germans, when we stopped and searched and questioned there, and put into German trucks and taken this huge field where there's a big concentration of Allied troops, mostly French and French colonials in the field.
We were interrogated the following day. It's Willie, I think, that must have thought up the idea of the Gaelic, because we spoke Gaelic and they hadn't a clue as to what nationality we were. But we said we were Russians. This is when we said we were Russians.
We couldn't answer the back in French, evidently, and we just sort of shrugged our shoulders, said nothing. And the three of us who didn't answer the questions were taken aside. And the maps were produced, fingers pointed at the maps to ask us to denote where we did come from. So there's a map of Russia produced, or a part of Russia was in it anyway. And I suddenly decided, right, we're Russians. And I pointed, and my finger landed on, or near Kiev. So I didn't want to say Kiev in case he asked me, do you know such a square, such a street in Kiev? He might have visited Kiev in pre-war days. And I said no, and I pointed to the Caucasus. Oh, this is Cossack. Yes, so he laughed. And that was it.
You were actually speaking Gaelic to them?
I was speaking Gaelic to them. They were speaking back to me, and I was giving them all a lot of Gaelic words which couldn't be put in print. But he then asked me to write my name down. And I wrote my name down. I wrote down Uail Eamkempe. My own name in Gaelic, I didn't know the name of my name for Kemp. I knew William was the name for William. And he says, Aleman. I says, Aleman, no, Rus. And he asked me the name of the place I came from. And the first word that came into my head, funny enough, was Artnastang, which is a small township in Strongia. So with that, they had a confab in German, which we didn't understand. And he called over a French officer who was standing by at the time and motioned us towards the gate. There's a gate on the entrance of this field onto the main road. And the French officer came down with us, accompanied them, came to the gate, and as he opened the gate, he shook hands with each of us and says, Bon voyage. Now that man knew fine who we were. He either knew that we still had the British Army boots on, which a fact the Germans never noticed. And what I thought was very stupid, if the Germans had taken us individually, you see, instead of collectively, we hadn't got a leg to stand on. It was then, as soon as we left that field, we sat down by the side of the road and I hammered out the fact or tried, after this, every word we speak is Gaelic, you see, and told them now where we're from. We'll tell them all the same story, and if we're separate or split, don't deviate from the story. Insist that you're Russians and speak nothing but Gaelic.
So that was fine. We got there, and we collected. I had a Dutch hoe, Willie had an ordinary hoe, and Sandy had a rake or something, and we carried that with us for about a week. It was a sort of a camouflage, you see. We were farm workers, you see.
Russian peasants?
Russian peasants, yeah, and farm workers. You know. And it was quite a good thing. It helped us. Oh, it definitely helped us.
Were you speaking Gaelic among yourselves?
Yes. Oh, yes. We made a point of speaking Gaelic so that we wouldn't get tripped up or anything like that. So we did all right, and we were away. It was another week again, and we got taken again. Now, we had 8 interpreters giving us lolly, trying to find out where we came from. This particular fellow, a hard-bitten citizen with rimless glasses on, real Prussian, old, you know, the old Prussian soldier, you know. And he was getting wild. And every time they would ask me where I came from, I would say, and get at the Gideon, you see. And he was looking for Erin on the map, you see. It was an awful job keeping a straight face, you see, but him looking hard. And he kept looking for about 10 minutes. They couldn't find Erin on the map at all. So there was a French soldier there, a sergeant, and he persisted in saying, Angleterre soldat, you see, English soldier. And at last the German turned around, livid with temper. Bah, Angleterre, he says, oh, we heard that. Fine. That was us safe, you see. We always started every morning about 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock in the morning we started walking. In the places where there was no curfew. If there was a curfew on, you daren't move till 6. I think it was 6, when the local population would begin to move around. But you had to shy clear of the French. Oh, you had never to speak to them at all, or you never knew what was going to happen, you know. Anyway, we discovered that there was a refugee fund in which you went to the Marie, if you came to any size of a town, and you went to Marie and asked for a chit in which you could get food. You went up to, there was a communal food centre, you see, and this chit you got from the Marie, that's the provost of the town. The chit authorised you to get some food. Anyway, we went into this particular, I can't remember the name of the place, and we asked, by Jove, this Frenchman, he was real pro-German. Oh, definitely so. He must have been under their heel, but anyway, he said, he asked for our papier, you see, papers, you see, because we had no papier. Oh, he says, obligés à rite, messieurs. You see, this was going to arrest us. So, you basket, you're not going to take us up. And I picked up a chair, a big heavy chair that was there. And I crowned him over the top of the head with a big oak chair. And he was alone in the room. We locked the door and we threw the key away and we kept walking, just quite naturally, quietly, expecting somebody to come after. We never saw or heard the cheap of it. Not a thing.
Did you ever doubt that you would see Ballachullish again?
Oh, never, not for 1 minute. No, we used to sing Gaelic songs to ourselves at night.
Oh, we did that, aye. Of course, the favourite one, of course, was Clown Ballachullish. Aye, we sang it off. And different songs. Wee snatches here and there, just to keep our sort of spirits up.
And I quoted poetry, and there's one I thought was very appropriate. I forget who the author was. It went, bed in the bush with stars to see, bread I dip in the river. This is the life for a man like me. This is the life forever. Is that the right word?
You used to sing and play a game as well.
Well, we used to, when the kilometres were measured, I think they were measured in hundreds there. And then when we came to 98, the 98th kilometre, we used to skip along and shout, 98, 99, 100, like children.
And another thing, we didn't forget our religion either. In fact, this was one and only time we really fell out. Sandy, being a good Ballachullish man and a good churchgoer, he would persist in keeping his prayer book. Now, on the flyleaf of the British Army prayer book is King George VI, you know, defender of the faith and what have you on it. Now, if the Germans saw that, well, I wouldn't be speaking to you just now. Anyway, Wally said to him, get that thing out of there or else I'll brain you. Anyway, there was huge tracks made by lorries. Sandy went over and laid the book reverently down and covered it up as if he was burying a human being. So that was one of the times when we really fell out, you know, merely because of the book, nothing else. It would have killed us, you know.
Were you able to keep track of the time?
No, not very well. We maybe knew the day, but we didn't know the date. The only time that I knew the date was the day we entered Spain. The night we crossed the Pyrenees, I knew it was a Sunday. Because I'll always remember when we did get over the frontier and we knew that we were well on our way to the coast. We could see the coast in the distance. And we sang the Old Hundred that Sunday morning, maybe 4,000 or 5,000 feet up in the Pyrenees. It was cold right enough. But
Did you pray much?
no, I didn't say we'd pray, no. After the carnage we saw on the way down, you know, the refugees, the slaughter among men, women, children, even cattle, and that. It was hard to believe, you know, that a God could allow that carnage to go on. We didn't ever lose our belief in God, not for 1 minute, or we wouldn't have sang the Old Hundred up in the Pyrenees.
But before you got to sing the Old Hundred up in the Pyrenees, there were several problems to overcome.
We saw a Spanish, he's a Spanish uniform man who came down the hill with a mule, and he spoke to us, and we told him that we were all French soldiers trying to get back to join the French army in Britain. So he made us sign to follow him. We followed him. Then we discovered ourselves landed in Spanish barracks, a military barracks, where we were promptly cross-examined and told to wait a while, and then put in a truck and taken back over and shoved back over the Spanish frontier again, into no man's land, the bit between France and Spain. So we just promptly walked down another 100 yards and recrossed again. We hadn't gone down, I hadn't travelled more than a mile, when a couple of Spanish soldiers suddenly appeared from a clump of bracken, and then were yanked back out again. We did the same again, went down, but were the same old thing again. There seemed to be Spanish soldiers everywhere. And there was a Spanish officer there who spoke some English, and I spoke to him and explained to him who we were. He took me outside and he pointed up the hill and said, "You see these holes up there?" And I says, "Yes." Yes, these are old lead mine workings, and they're interlinked with paths that the men used to go to their work along. Well, if you go up there, climb up there, follow these paths, go over the ridge and straight down, you'll come into San Sebastian, which we did. And there's a Spanish policeman directing traffic. So I went up and spoke to him. And well, I won't ask him for the British consul. I'll ask him for the American consul first. Shook his head. Consul Americano. No. He says, Consul Inglesi. And I says, yes. I nodded my head at him. I said, that'll do fine. And he took him by the arm. And of course, my two friends, Sandy and Ginger, said, that's him, he's off again, locked up again. But the Spanish police was just going to point out to me where the British consulate was. And he pointed down the street and told me to look down there. And I looked down there. Flying above the window was a Union Jack. The greatest sight I ever saw in my life.
It was a great adventure, and it was a great achievement. A personal achievement, yes, I would say so.
Afterwards, when I looked over it, I thought it was the best hitchhiking holiday I've ever had.
In the Ballachullish escape, you heard the voices of Willie Kemp and Ginger Wilson talking to Kenny McIntyre.
It was fun trying to beat Hitler at his own game, but the time when you really began to appreciate the power of broadcasting was when you heard a story like this next one. It's worthy of the best adventure books. It puts the Scottish soldier on a level above most others, and it's so unbelievable it has to be true. James Wilson on how he and some companions took the long way home from the battlefields of France to Ballachullish.
It took us 1 month and 3 days to get from France back to Ballachullish. In the beginning of May, 35 of us were fighting 2,000 Germans, defending a small house. We were completely surrounded. and on the last day the shells were coming over to a penny. We were captured about 2:30 in the afternoon. The German officer came into the square in front of the house and asked our captain if that was all the men he had. The captain told him, yes, this is all. And the officer said, if the French had made such a stand as you, we wouldn't have been so where we are today. He also said we were not to be ashamed of being prisoners, but we found it most degrading to have to stand there like a lot of sheep. We always had a sneaking feeling that we could make a bend for it. The French people were putting pails of water at the roadside for the prisoners as they were marching along. Of course, there was always a rush for the water. And during one rush, we three kept on past the pails and round the end of a house into the garden. There was a French boy in the garden and he pointed to a bush. We went and hid there, and the boy brought his civilian clothes and a map. And later his mother came out with food. We waited there until the column had passed and then set off over the country. One night I fell ill, so we slept in a pigsty where there was a lot of nice clean straw. As we were lying there, two Jerrys came in, just looking to see what they could find. My pals pointed at me and said, "Kamerad, my lad." And the Jerry said, "Slumber," meaning sleep on. I was better in the morning, and as we were walking along the road, a German lorry stopped and gave us a lift for about 8 kilometers. They believed that we were Belgian refugees. Things were going too well. And one day, as we were looking at the signpost at a crossroad, a German came up and asked us for our papers. When we said we had none, he set us to work emptying French ammunition and equipment, which they had captured. That night we were put on a lorry and had to leave all our goods and chattels behind us, as we were prisoners again. We denied that we were English and spoke Gaelic the whole time, which the Germans couldn't understand. They tried 8 interpreters on us, but it was no good. Then they produced a map and asked us to point out where we came from. Big Willie put his finger as far north as he could reach in Russia, and when they saw that, they let us go. We had plenty of adventures after that, but we were getting used to them. And with a bit of luck and our Gaelic, we went on south until we came to the Pyrenees.
You know, Jimmy, I'd dearly love to know what happened to James Wilson and Big Willie. Maybe somebody will tell us.
Some story, isn't it? Actually, it's more than possible that someone will tell you, Pat. I mean, Ballachullish is not all that big a place, and there's still a lot of people around who went through those kind of things.